Just waiting on one more presenter. Just a second. Okay, it's just gone on to 4:05, so we're just going to make a quick start. I'm going to pass over to Karen first to take us through the attendance and apologies.
Members, you're hereby summoned to attend the special meeting of Council, which will be a hybrid meeting conducted remotely via WebEx and physically in the Council Chamber Guildhall on Monday the 13th of March 2023 at 4 p.m. So just commence with the roll call. So Alderman Breslin. Alderman Devaney.
Here, Karen.
Alderman Guy. Alderman Hussey. Alderman Kerrigan. Alderman McCready. Alderman McMorris. Alderman Thompson.
Here, Karen.
Alderman Wark. Councillor Jason Barr. Councillor Raymond Barr. Councillor John Boyle.
Online, Karen.
Councillor Michaela Boyle. Councillor Carr.
Here, Karen.
Councillor Cusack. Councillor Dobbins. Councillor Donnelly.
And Shaw.
Councillor Doyle.
Here, Karen.
Councillor Duffy. Alex.
Shaw.
Councillor Duffy.
Michelle.
Councillor Edwards. Councillor Farrell.
In the chamber.
Councillor Ferguson.
Here, online, Karen.
Councillor Gallagher.
And Shaw.
Councillor Harkin.
Here.
Councillor Heaney.
Shaw.
Councillor Jackson.
Shaw.
Councillor Kelly. Councillor Logue.
Patricia's just way a constituent at the minute, Karen. She'll be joining on shortly.
Okay. Councillor McGinley.
And Shaw.
Councillor McGuyan. Councillor Maguire. Councillor McHugh.
Shaw online, Karen.
Councillor McKinney. Councillor Mooney. Councillor Norris. Councillor O'Neill.
Here.
Councillor Riley. Councillor Sonoya Barr. And Councillor Taney. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Karen. Just in terms of the broadcasting statement, I would like to remind everyone present at this meeting in the council office or in attendance remotely that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with our protocol. Due to your attendance at this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight a request to speak. A copy of the council privacy notice can be found on the council website. Okay, so thank you everyone for your attendance. I have no chairperson's business, and if anybody has any declarations of interest, if they could put them in the chat box.
Has it not, Kim? Hold on, I'll try it again.
Sorry?
Sorry, Mayor. Representatives from the SPPG are having some difficulties getting on.
It's left my computer now, Kim.
Sorry, Pat.
I'll forward it again here.
Sorry, Pat.
Yeah, okay, we can hear you, Deborah, and we can hear Pat possibly forwarding the link.
Yes.
We can forward the
Forward it
link
again,
again as
Kevin.
well.
Sorry about that. It's just
You're-
we're used to using this means of
Okay, thing, but.
Yeah.
we use of Zoom and things. So sorry, I think Dr. Cosgrove was just having some difficulties. So apologies for that.
No, you're absolutely fine. I know when you work across different platforms, WebEx can be a difficult one. So no, I appreciate that. We'll send the link again to Dr. Cosgrove, and hopefully he will get it and be able to get on. So thank you for that, Deborah. Okay, so just again, if anybody has any declarations of interest, if they could put them in the chat box or let it be known to ourselves here, and we'll get that recorded. In terms of chairperson's business, no, I don't have any, but we're here today for a special meeting of council to discuss Racecourse medical practice and the current issues that are there. So we have a deputation from the Strategic Planning and Performance Group that are going to talk us through a presentation and not a declaration of interest as such, but as a councillor representing the Ballyarnett ward, quite interested in this. So thank you. Deborah or Pat, will I pass over to you yourselves first, and hopefully Dr. Cosgrove will be able to join us. Deborah, are you there? Are you on mute?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. We're just trying to get Pat and Dr. Raleigh sorted. Sorry.
Do you know what? We will give you a couple of minutes. I think it's only fair to try and get you online. So
I think Dr. Cosgrove's on now. I see him on now. I think Pat Brawley's trying to get on too. So apologies from us.
I'm on here now, so there's Kevin Cosgrove here. Sorry
Thank
for the
you.
delay.
Excellent. Okay, well, I pass over to yourselves then for the presentation.
Now, just could you give us 5 minutes just to see if Pat Brawley can get on? Pat is the presentation. He's at all. We were all prepared for you, but apologies again.
No problem. We know technology can often let us down at the most inopportune moments, but we'll leave it with you for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Can you hear, Pat?
Just checking. Is content to continue?
Can you let them know if you're ready to start?
Oh, what I got, can you?
Oh, you're okay now, Pat?
No, I don't think so. You speak, and if I can't hear, then I'll use the presentation up. Have you?
I have the presentation's up there. Can you see it on there?
Yeah, the presentation's here. We've shared the presentation. So we can move it on for you as she
How
goes
do
through
you do
it.
this here?
Here. Speak you into the thing. Unmute yourself.
I have myself unmuted.
Can you hear now,
Can you hear
Pat?
me?
No?
We can hear you, yeah.
Apologies about that, everyone.
Go ahead, you're grand.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, I could hear you, Pat.
Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
we're already
I can't
here
hear you, but I
whenever
can
you're
hear- I
ready
can't
to
hear you,
begin.
but you can hear me okay?
Yes. So just tell them that you'll do
Yeah.
the presentation.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that, and if there's any questions, then Kevin and I will try and
Yeah, we can try and answer it. Yeah, yeah.
work our way through.
Right away, okay. Thank you. Bye. Apologies, everyone. I seem to be having some technical difficulties in relation to my speaker. I can't hear yourselves, but hopefully you can hear me. And I'm happy to take you through the presentation, which outlines the GMS position as we are, and my particular focus in relation to the two practices in the Derry and Strabane District Council area who have provided us with notice that they're handing back their GMS contract. I forwarded a presentation at the end of February, which you've got up, and I'm happy to take members through it. If that's okay. The first slide is in relation to the situation, just to highlight the fact that there has been a number of practices who have handed back their contract in recent years. In April 2016, we had 345 GP practices across Northern Ireland, but as a result of recent GP retirements and handing back and mergers and amalgamations, at April 2022, that figure is down now to 319 GP practices across Northern Ireland. Next slide, please. Current position, 319 practices. There have been 13 practices across Northern Ireland who have handed their contracts back in the current financial year. 5 of those practices are currently in the Western area. We had the first one, which was Dromore and Trillick, which is now being managed by the Western Trust. And then in recent months, we've had Maple, based in Lisnaskea, hand back their contract. We've also had Brookborough and Tempo hand back their contract. And in the Derry and Strabane district area, we've had Bridge Street Medical Practice hand back their contract, and Racecourse practice based in Chantal have handed back their contract. And I suppose there's a number of other practices who are experiencing difficulties in relation to trying to meet the current demand that is being placed upon them at present. Next slide, please. This is just a history of the practices who have in recent times handed back their contract. We had Ederney and Newton Stewart amalgamated with the Castlederick practice, and they are now referred to as the Western Rural Healthcare and have been since 2016. In 2016-17, we had Brookborough and Tempo amalgamated following the retirement of Dr. Smith in Maguire's Bridge. Next slide, please. Subsequently then in 2017, we had Culca Medical Practice being formed, and that was the combination of Benochlan surgery, the Derry-Gonley surgery, and the Derry-Lynn surgery. That was 3 separate practices, and they amalgamated to become one medical practice, which is based in the western part of Fermanagh. Also in 2017, again following the retirement and resignation of a number of GPs, we had the creation of Maple Healthcare, which was a combination of the Maple Group practice, which was based in Lisnaskea. We also had then Dr. Leary, who retired in Lisnaskea, followed by Dr. Kevin Devlin in Newton Butler and Dr. Collins in Rosslea, and they became part of the Maple Healthcare Group in 2017. Next slide, please. This slide outlines the process following the handing back of the contract. The current contractual requirements is that a single-handed contractor is required to provide us with 3 months' notice. A partnership or group practice is required to provide the board with 6 months' notice, and those are outlined in the current GMS contract, which dates back to 2004. Following the receipt of a contractor informing us that they're handing back the contract, we would advertise the contract widely. We would advertise it in the medical journals, the British Medical Journal, the Irish Medical Journal, Pulse Online, and a number of other social media outlets. We would write to the patients and inform them that their practice has handed back their contract, but we will be making every effort to ensure we try and secure another contractor and to remain registered with the practice. We would then meet with all of the local practices, the local GP Federation and the local trust where appropriate, as we had to do in the situation of Dromore and Trullick. We would also, where requested, meet with the local elected representatives and respond to AQs in relation to the particular matter. Next slide, please. We would provide any statements to the media where requested. And following the advertisement, if we've received any applicants, we would interview the applicants, and they would go through a process of applying and being interviewed, and then should they be successful, we would offer them the contract. We would write to the patients and other practices in the area, informing them of the outcome of the interviews, and then discuss any contractual issues with the incoming contractor, should there be one. I suppose just to highlight the issues that general practice are facing at present, there's a number of workforce issues. There's a number of GPs who would be nearing retirement age, and we're having difficulties in trying to recruit GPs to take on partnerships in general practice. The contract, as I said, is a 2004 contract. It was designed at a point in time, and circumstances have changed in those 18 years that we're in the need now probably to consider drafting a new contract, but that takes a number of years. Also as well, practices are facing increasing costs as a result of the cost of living crisis, increasing in the cost of electricity, heat, light and power, etc. There's an increasing demand being placed upon general practice as well. People are living longer, and there's changing demographics. All of these pressures are being practices are having to deal with at present. The next slide, please. Also as well, there's a shift of work from secondary care into primary care. There's premises issues that can tie practices up in. There's indemnity. This is being raised and significant cost that is being burned. The GPs are having to pay, and there's in England. The health service are paying for the indemnity costs of GPs, and I suppose we're trying to work with the Department of Health to try and secure indemnity for GPs within Northern Ireland. There's a pension issue as well in relation to the lifetime allowance and the pension pot that is available for GPs. Also as well, there's a work-life balance that GPs are trying to manage now as well, and now portfolio working, there's greater opportunities for GPs to avail of all our opportunities and the other opportunities that they wish to avail of, as well as working in general practice. So it's trying to balance all of those demands. Next slide. Measures that we are trying to sustain GMS services. There's ongoing support from the local offices based in Grantia Park. We discussed the possibility of mergers or amalgamations with local practices to see if that's a possibility. We have entered just a number of initiatives to try and support general practice. We've got the general practice pharmacist scheme, we've got the multidisciplinary teams, and we've got the introduction of advanced nurse practitioners in certain parts of the Western area. I suppose as well, we have some specific funding schemes that Dr. Margaret O'Brien has made available to practices in the Western area to try and support them. There is also as well the general practice improvement and crisis response team that work with practices and at times of difficulty, and we are working with the general practice and crisis response team in relation to both Bridge Street and to Racecourse. We have just as well recently introduced the Attract, Recruit, Retain scheme that was approved by the former minister, that was released in January, and that is a scheme whereby there's a financial incentive available for GPs if they take on either a salaried or general practice role in a particular practice. And also as well, the number of GP training places were increased. There's a further 10 places added this year. And I suppose discussions are ongoing with the Department of Health in relation to securing those additional training places with the possibility of increasing them further. Next slide, please. I suppose the next and the final two slides just focus in on Racecourse Medical Practice and on Bridge Street. Racecourse Medical Practice, they handed back their contract in November 22. That provides us with 6 months' notice. The contract is due to end on the 31st of May. We've written out to the patients. A recruitment process has begun. Applications have now closed, and well, we had planned to interview on the week commencing the 27th of February, but we've had to delay that to now towards the end of March. And we would advise patients to continue to contact their GP practice as normal as we work our way through this process. And then the final slide is in relation to Bridge Street. They handed their contract back in January with the result the 6 months period notice ends on the 31st of July. Again, we've issued the letter to their patients. Recruitment process has begun. Again, we hope to interview now at the beginning of April in respect of the Bridge Street Medical Practice. And again, patients should continue to contact their GP practice as normal, again, as we work our way through this process. So I hope that I haven't run through that too quickly, but Dr. Kevin Cosgrove, myself, or Deborah are happy to take any questions in relation to what we've just run through.
Thank you, Pat, for taking us through that presentation, and glad to get you online. And thank you to Deborah and Dr. Cosgrove as well for attending. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, I am a counsellor for Ballyarnett, which takes in Racecourse Medical, particularly probably over 4,000.
Apologies, I'm unable to hear.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, as long as maybe Deborah and Dr. Cosgrove can hear, hopefully we can get through it. But as a counsellor for Ballyarnett, we're being contacted constantly from residents, from patients of the practice who are really concerned about where they're going and if they're going to have a GP come the 1st of June. I know I've had my own conversations, and our MLAs have been having conversations as well with the trust, with the department and various other people in connection to it. So I know from talking to some of the staff as well that are working in the practice, they're really concerned as well for their jobs and where things are going. But I'm not going to hog the meeting. I'm going to open it up for people who, for our other members here. So Councillor Doyle first, and then Councillor Farrell.
Mayor, and thanks, Deborah, Kevin and Pat for coming today. I think you know, particularly Deborah, I've had you tortured, and apologies for emailing and ringing about this over the last number of weeks. But as the Mayor said rightly, I'm a councillor for the Ballyarnett DEA as well, and we are getting a lot of calls from concerned constituents, but also staff. So if it's okay, I have a number of questions. Primarily, I worked for the British Medical Association about 10 years ago with Dr. Tom Black and Dr. Alan Stout, who you'll know. And I remember having conversations about this scenario taking place then. And it doesn't seem to me that the department have got a grasp of when these things are actually going to take place. I mean, obviously, with regards to Racecourse, it's around the retirement of one of the practice contractors. So, how did the department not see this coming? I mean, obviously, when people get to a certain age, they're going to retire. It was always going to put the practice in difficulty. So that's my primary question. I know that from your presentation there that there is currently one, I think, GP practice in the Western area that is managed directly by the Trust. Can you give us an idea of what mechanism there would be and when the Trust determines that it should step in? Is that when, for example, after a period where maybe no applicants come forward or they've interviewed applicants and they're not suitable, that the Trust will then do it, will then step in? And in terms of the staff, I met with staff just today, about an hour ago, who've recently been given a risk of redundancy letter because of the uncertainty that the Trust or the practice now faces. I understand from the conversations that I've had with Deborah that the week beginning the 7th of March, the date for the interview for the one applicant was going to be arranged. If that's the case, if there's only one applicant, now you know you're saying it's going to be the end of March before there's going to be any kind of process now in terms of an interview. Can we give any kind of assurance to staff? I mean, and can you maybe give me an idea of, given that they're private contractors, if there's another contractor, are those staff covered under CHIPI arrangements, for example? Because there's 8 receptionists, a practice manager, and a few other staff that are managed by the GP Federation, like the phlebotomist and the mental health nurse. But ultimately, I think what everybody wants to know is, can you give a guarantee that Racecourse Medical will not close? That even if the organisation that's come forward to be interviewed isn't suitable, that the Trust will step in and manage this GP surgery? Because there's almost 5,000 patients there. There's also thousands of patients, as I'm sure everybody else knows, in Bridge Street Medical. It's going to get to a point, if these issues aren't addressed, where there are frankly going to be thousands of people in this district who can't get access to a GP, which means they can't get referrals and everything else done. So if you could help me with those questions, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Sorry, there's a few speakers here. It would be easier if we take the speakers and then I come back to yourselves, if that's okay. Okay, Councillor Farrell.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Deborah, Kevin, and Pat for attending here today. And I think every representative in this chamber, and indeed the patients at Racecourse Medical and Bridge Street Medical, what they want to see as a bare minimum is that the current service continues. And the feedback we've got here today is that Racecourse Medical, we've got a sort of deadline of the 31st of May. There are people have expressed an interest in the contracts. Nobody's been interviewed yet. Bridge Street, we've got a deadline of the 31st of July. Interviews haven't taken place. We don't know if there's any sort of suitable applicants at the minute. So that creates a massive degree of uncertainty for the patients. It creates a massive degree of uncertainty for the staff employed at those practices. And it creates a massive degree of uncertainty for the GPs and staffs and patients at all the other practices across this city, because if Bridge Street closes, thousands of patients will need to be redistributed elsewhere. If Racecourse closes, the same's going to happen. So we think that everybody needs certainty. Everybody needs clarity regarding this. And one great thing about our health service is that it's free at the point of delivery. But it's only free at the point of delivery if you actually get service and you get treatment, because, you know, our experience in recent years is that the waiting lists for every single aspect of the health service have gone through the roof. And if there's no solution found for Racecourse or Bridge Street, that the waiting lists across the access GP services across this city and district are going to go through the roof as well. I've got a number of questions. In your slides, you were talking about, you know, the pressures facing GP practices. So in your professional opinion, what is the biggest threat to GP practices across the city and district and across the north? My second question is about your department's understanding of the sustainability of GP practices across this city and district. So would you, for example, conduct a regular sort of review of GP practices, you know, like a bill of health, to understand whether there's concerns at a particular practice, whether there's no concerns at all, or if there's serious concerns, you know, where it's actually at crisis point and it can no longer continue. And the reason I ask that, and Councillor Doyle sort of touched on it, is when this news that Racecourse handed back their contract and Bridge Street handed back their contract, did this come out of the blue, or was you expecting it? Did you know this was coming down the track? My third question is, no interviews have taken place. Do you have any degree of confidence that these contracts are going to be awarded to anybody, and that the service that thousands of people across this city rely on a daily basis is going to be protected? And my fourth question, my last question, folks, is, and this is asked by somebody that's currently a patient at Racecourse. They want to leave Racecourse. They want to go to another practice because at the minute, the uncertainty is giving them serious anxiety. Are they prevented from trying to access another practice, or can they currently apply for another practice? Because at the minute, the understanding is no, you have to wait until the decision's made on the 31st of May. So there's a number of questions in there. I appreciate some form of answer. But thank you for coming today. Your attendance is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farrell. Two further speakers, and then I'll come back to yourselves. Councillor O'Neill and then Councillor McGonigan.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to Deborah, Gavin and Pat for coming on to present. I'm a councillor for the Moor area, so Bridge Street is in the Moor area and is impacted as well, and by them handing their contract back. I know that like GP practices are under immense pressure because they're at the front door of our health and social care service, which is in crisis. So they're, you know, at the cold face of things, just like ED. And, you know, I think that these contracts being handed back is a symptom in a way of the crisis of our health and social care service. Like I was down chatting to workers in Bridge Street, and they're very stressed and very worried. And the health impacts of these potential closures on staff and patients is very, very worrying. And I suppose that what the main thing that I'm looking for from this meeting today is a guarantee that, you know, these essential GP practices for people in our local community won't be closed, that if we can't find anybody to take over these contracts, that the trust will step in. Like, you know, it would be great to get a guarantee so that like any of the stresses and fears of local patients and of staff working there can be alleviated. Like, I suppose I think the main issue here is that you touched on it in the presentation, in a way that, you know, these contracts were made in 2004, but is this current model working? Like GP practices are generally under a privatized model of healthcare. You know, is that working? We've got one example of a GP practice in the Western Trust, which is, you know, run by the Western Trust. And we're seeing more and more with allied health professionals and advanced nurse practitioners, as you have said, working as first contact practitioners within GP practices. And that's very welcome. However, their contracts vary between some being employed by the Trust and some being employed by the GP Federation. So is the current model working, or do we need to relook at this? I think in Scotland there's a variety of models, and I think they've really expanded on, publicly and trust-controlled GP practices, again with that array of allied health professionals working within the practice, employed by the whatever health trust works there. So I suppose my two key asks are, can there be guarantees given, and is the current model working, and if it's not, how can we actually change it? Is this something that the Department of Health is looking at from Stormont? Has the Health Minister actually looked at the sustainability of GP practices and what's coming forward with that regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Councillor McGowan.
Thank you. I suppose being a councillor for Ballyarnett, it's an issue which is really worrying thousands of people in that area. It worries me that, you know, we're at a stage now where we've only had one person that replied in terms of the contract or the tender that was put out. And I suppose, like everyone else, we're worried about A, the workers, and B, the people who rely on the GP as their first port of call for the health service. It concerns me if you haven't been involved for many years in tenders. If only one person replies to a tender, it sort of pricks my ears up immediately. Is there any chance that application process will be reopened? I suppose is one of the questions I have. But like everyone else here, the people out there are looking for, some commitment that there's not going to be a loss of service. Like Councillor Doyle has said, people, if they're lucky, might get into an RGP practice. Good luck with that. I'm trying to get someone onto a practice at the moment. The practices are trying to deal with far too many patients at the moment. It's difficult to get into a practice. So I really would hate to think what would happen if two practices had thousands of people trying to get out on the other ones. That's not the solution. I suppose the solution is to get these two contracts taken back up with someone else, or in some way to find, and in the interim period, to get a commitment from the trust or wherever, that no matter how long it takes, that people will still be able to see a GP or a practice nurse, and also to give some commitment to the staff in both of those organisations who don't know what's going on. They haven't done anything wrong. They've showed up for work. They've worked right through COVID, and now they find themselves in a situation where they don't know when their job is going to end, which is an awful place to be in. So I suppose my question is similar to what others have said. It's two, is the application process going to be reopened? And number two, or second part of that question, if this doesn't meet the deadline set, is it going to be a case of someone stepping on to provide GP services in those areas?
Thank you, Councillor McGowan. I think there has plenty of questions there to be getting on with. So I know Pat can't hear us. So Dr. Cosgrove,
I think I can. Can you hear me now, Francis?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Apologies. I somebody sent me a wee message there and I was able to get on. So apologies about having to do the presentation the way I did.
Did you hear most of the questions, Pat, or do you want us?
I heard all of the questions there, Kevin. Yeah, I heard all of the questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
so do you want to go?
Or do you want me to go?
Will we try and answer as many as we can
Yeah.
then between myself, Kevin, and Deborah, if that's okay?
That would be great, thanks.
Well, I suppose the first thing is, I suppose we've had a number of contractors who've handed back their contract, and unfortunately, in a lot of the situations, there's not a significant number of applicants for any of the new contractors, and this has been a story for a number of years. So, it's just to say that having one or two applications is not out of the ordinary. We are making every effort to ensure that a new contractor will be available for the two practices. However, we can't give any guarantees in terms of securing a new contractor. What we can give is a guarantee that there will be a provision of GMS services for all of the patients who are currently registered with Bridge Street and with Shantallow. We're making every effort to ensure that we do secure a contractor for both of those practices. And it is a long and complicated process. And the interviews have been delayed for valid reasons, but we do hope to be interviewing now before the end of March, beginning of April, for the two practices. And as soon as we're aware of the situation, we will be happy to update yourselves and update the patients. In relation to the staff, I do appreciate that this is a very trying time for staff. But should a new contractor be secured, then under Chippy, all of the staff who are currently working and employed in Racecourse and in Bridge Street have the rights protected and will automatically transfer across to the new contractor under law. So they have the legal right under Chippy to be transferred across to the new contractor. So as I say, we're making every effort to ensure that we do secure a new contractor, and the staff will be protected as a result of that. I do accept at the minute that there is a list freeze. Dr. Margaret O'Brien, the head of GMS services, has, to support practices during the winter pressures period, has put in place a list freeze which ends on the 31st of March in the first instance. So at present, patients are not in a position to move, and that is to protect the current practices, giving all the demands that have been placed on them during the winter. Probably going forward, there will possibly be a list freeze for Racecourse and for Bridge Street in order to secure that, because we need to maintain that patient group for the new contractor. So there may be a patient freeze so that patient body is protected for any new contractor. In terms of, we were not aware of we're in regular contacts with practices, but things happen. They are independent contractors, and we contract with them, but it's within their rights to hand back their contract and give us the notice. We are in regular contact with all of our practices across the Western area, but sometimes things happen outside of the control of the practices, which result in them having to serve notice on us. And some of those situations we're not aware of, but that's outside the control of the practice. But as a result of that, we try and work with the practice to ensure that a new contractor is available, and we work through that process. It is a long process, it's a complicated process, but we would be confident that we will be in a position to secure contractors for the two practices. In the situation in Dromore and Trillick, we were unable to secure an independent GMS contractor. So Dr. Margaret O'Brien, in discussions with the Department of Health, approached the Western Trust. Whether that situation will happen for Bridge Street and Shantallow, I can't say yet, because we haven't come to that point. We still have to interview the respective applicants for the two contractors. That is always an option that is available. I'm just looking down through the current model. As I said, it goes back to 2004. Things have changed, and I suppose in I think it's probably become into sharp focus in recent years with the number of mergers and amalgamations. I think we've had 13 within the last year. Obviously, Dr. Margaret O'Brien is in discussions with the Department of Health in relation to trying to identify a way forward that meets the current demands that are being placed on practices and what GPs want to be, the model of care that GPs want to provide in the future. So certainly there will be, and then should there be a new assembly, I'm sure that's one of the things that they will be considering as well, possible way forward for GMS services into the future to take account of the different demands that are being placed on general practice at present. Kevin and Deborah, if there's anything else that you'd like to add, and then we're happy to, in case we've missed any questions.
Well, we'll just maybe go back to Councillor Doyle, who first set us some questions there, and what one of his main queries was why did the department not see this coming? And I would totally agree with you with your concern about that, because from our local office point of view, we would have pointed this out for many years that this was imminent because of the age profile of the GPs and also the lack of investment in development of nursing services in general practice. So we totally understand the concerns and the worries of both the staff and the patients in these two practices. But like Pat, I would be confident that there will be a contractor appointed for both of the practices. And in any event, there's absolutely no concern that the patients will be left without any general practice cover. They will be allocated to a GP if the worst came to the worst, but we would expect that there will be a new contractor in place to maintain the practice as it is, or both practices as they are. Then Councillor Farrell was just again mentioned the great uncertainty for staff as regards redundancies, etc., as well as the concerns of the patients, and made the point that the NHS is only free at the point of delivery if a service is delivered. This is partly due to the increasing demand in practice for GPs, as Pat has pointed out, because of the changing demographic of the society general. There's more older people and people with complex comorbidities. So the workload in GPs has greatly increased, but also there's another issue here is a ever lengthening waiting lists concerns in secondary care, which hasn't been addressed over the years by minister after minister in the north of Ireland. We have continued to try and get this improved as best we can, but you'll appreciate that these decisions of the development in the Department of Health are at a much higher level than us, and we can only hope that they will take account of what they're hearing from the people at the front line. Councillor Farrell then also asked about what did we think was the biggest threat as regards sustainability of GP practices. And I suppose, to be fair, we would feel that generally smaller practices are more vulnerable because these pressures can be too difficult for one or two doctor practices, particularly if they're approaching retirement age, so that the future will probably be bigger groups working together with increased, hopefully, GP workforce, but also increased multidisciplinary support as well in the form of nurses specialising in different chronic disease areas and pharmacists, physiotherapists not available to all practice to support the delivery of primary care. You then asked about how had we been monitoring? Did we not see this coming? It says we have done practice visits on a rolling basis every 3 years for a long time. I'm doing this job for about 20 years now, and we would always try and analyse where they stand from the point of view of manpowers and concerns as regards premises and ability to deliver service, and we would have relayed this information on up the line. So whilst we're really disappointed that the stresses and the difficulties throughout the whole of Northern Ireland have come to this stage, we feel that we have done what we can to try and mitigate against this. But it obviously has come to crisis point at this stage. Pat then outlined is really the rationale behind the list freeze, so that obviously if there's rumours about a practice about to collapse, the patients are going to get anxious and they're all going to pile into other practices, which only just exacerbates the problem generally. So it's just really to try and control that. And I think from your point of view, you should just reassure patients that they will never at any stage be left without a GP with whom they're registered, regardless of what way things pan out. Councillor O'Neill then mentioned she was really in the Bridge Street area, and she mentioned was the contract working at the moment, and clearly it's not, because there's increasing difficulties, and part of the issue is that younger GPs in general are not that keen on signing up to permanent partnerships or to premises ownership. So this is a total change in the mindset of GPs from many years ago, when there was plenty of GPs applying for different posts, and they were also keen to develop their own premises. So that obviously there is a need for the contract to be changed. Again, that will be at a much higher level than us, and it will probably take time and doesn't really address these acute issues that you brought up today. And then finally, Councillor McGowan, he's concerned mainly in the Ballyarnett area, and expressed concerns about the workers within the practice and all the patients, and mentioned how difficult it is at the moment even to get a new GP, but it's probably because of the practice list freeze at the moment. But we've explained the reasons for that. So that's all I have, Pat. I'm happy to take any further questions from any of the councillors if they feel their questions haven't been answered.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Cosgrove and Pat. Just Deborah, if there's anything that you want to add, or will I go back out for further comments?
I'm not sure if somebody covered it, but somebody asked about the extension, possible extension, or going out again to re-advertise. And just to say, there was an extension provided for the Racecourse advertisement of a further 2 weeks. When we hadn't received any applicants, Dr. O'Brien requested that be extended for another 2 weeks. So we have already given it the additional time to see if we could attract any candidates. So that was to cover that point. Thank you.
Okay, Deborah, thank you. And just open it up again to the floor. I have Alderman Devaney looking to come in. He's online. Go ahead, Alderman.
Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me in, and can I just welcome Deborah, Kevin and Pat to the meeting today. And look, most of the questions have been asked and around what I was going to ask. But I have to say, you give us some heart there, Pat, by saying that there is almost a guarantee that there will be a new contract signed for both, could be a new contract signed for both of these organisations. And that is good news. And look, that allays the fears and the issue you raised and around staff, that they would be transferred. I think that's good news. But I think the big worry is out there is for those patients out there belonging to the two surgeries that they feel they have nobody there. And I think you've quite rightly said it's up to us as public representatives to get the message out there that they will be there and they will be helpful. But I mean, it's easy saying that, but we all know the waiting lists for getting into surgeries is getting longer and longer. And I do believe that whole issue and around surgeries, as you say, we're working on rules and regulations from 2004. I think that needs to be readdressed and reevaluated again and re-looked at. There's a change shift now, as you quite rightly said, from young doctors coming in now and what way they want to carry out their work besides a number of years ago. The only thing worries me is, are we aware, we're talking here about 2 surgeries at the moment, are we aware of any more that could be in jeopardy in the next 6 months or maybe into the next year? Would we be aware of any? And there's a fear in every surgery now. And as I talk to people, especially from rural areas and around surgeries, that there's a fear that there could be more. And maybe that would just be my question. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Back to, before I actually bring in Councillor Doyle and Councillor Farrell, I'm going to bring in Alderman Gay because he hasn't already had an opportunity. Alderman Gay, are you there?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. And apologies for coming on late, folks. But thanks for Deborah, Kevin and Pat for coming along today and giving their time up. Listen, maybe I'm covering old ground because, as I say, I missed a bit at the start, but I'm obviously I'm a patient of the other half of Bridge Street Medical. So was quite relieved to hear that it wasn't my surgery that was closing, but I know people that work for the other half of the surgery, and it's they're nervous. They're nervous. They're worried about their jobs. They're and what Councillor Doyle says there the day, if as soon as they hear that, it'll not fill them full of confidence. But just want to know, maybe you've covered this, and if you have, I apologise. But is there any other surgeries throughout Northern Ireland who have found themselves in the same situation and now have a new contract signed? And does the trust dangle any carrots for GPs? They sign the contracts, they take over these surgeries. I know that there's been a lot of work. There's ongoing work being done to my surgery, but I know that, and it's an old surgery, like the most of them are. But I know that Chantallo is an old building, and it probably needs a lot of work done to it. And maybe this is why a lot of GPs are saying, I don't know whether I want to take this on, and stuff like that there. But is there any incentive being given there to say that we will help with, the refurbishment of the building, and anything like that there? Is there any incentives being given to the GPs at all for them to come forward and say, well, you know what, that's a good deal. I'll take that up and see if I can work to improve this here surgery. And again, I apologise if those questions have been asked. Thanks. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Gay. Back to Councillor Doyle and Councillor Farrell.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for your responses. Some of them are very heartening. I'm sure there are a lot of people watching who will be very heartened as well by what's been said. Pat, if I can ask, just you mentioned something there around a guarantee. Can I just clarify that with you? Are you saying that regardless of what will happen, that beyond the 31st of May, there isn't going to be a closed sign hanging over the doors of Racecourse Medical, that regardless of what happens, whether a contractor is appointed or not, that my constituents in Ballyarnett will still be able to go on the 1st of June to see a doctor in Racecourse Medical? And the second aspect of it, Dr. Cosgrave, I was very interested to hear that that you've been telling the trust for a long time that these certain things would come up. In fact, in the letter that was given to staff in Racecourse Medical today, it actually says the practice is experiencing staffing difficulties with sickness and a planned retirement. So I suppose the question there is, if you're telling the trust or you're telling the department that a retirement is almost imminent, is it just a matter that they're just not listening? And if that's the case, what do we need to do to fix that? Because you can imagine with the age profile of GPs, and we've heard this before from other presentations, GPs are getting older. They're not being backfilled with younger GPs. This is going to keep happening. So if you're telling the department and they're not listening, what do we do about that? But in terms of, just to be absolutely clear, because I mean, this process is now, for Racecourse in particular, has been open since November of last year. We're almost 5 months, I suppose, really into the process. An interview hasn't taken place yet. If that contractor isn't appointed, are the trust able to step in a very close time frame? Because we're talking realistically about 2 months, when it's taken us 5 months to get to this stage. So ultimately, on the 1st of June, are people who are registered with Racecourse Medical going to be able to see and make appointments to see their GP as normal, regardless of what happens? Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Farrell.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Deborah, Kevin and Pat, for all your responses. Really, really interesting and encouraging as well. And what I took from it was that, there's a certain degree of confidence that a contractor for each of the practices will be identified and the practices will survive beyond the deadline dates that we have in the pack. But one question, based on the question I had asked about, do you have an understanding of the level of sustainability for practices right across the north, right across this city and district? And, were there regular sort of health checks done to understand if there were any issues there? And Dr. Cosgrove said that they're sort of reviewed on a 3-yearly basis to understand, the sustainability of that practice. Do you think there's an argument, or do you think there's value on doing that on a more regular basis? Because, a lot can happen in 3 years, and if they were done every year or every 2 years, these problems might be identified a lot sooner, and the potential fixes can be put in place a lot quicker as well. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farrell. Okay, I'm going to pass back to yourselves. Pat, Dr. Cosgrove and Deborah, I don't know who wants to take the lead.
I suppose if I just start then with some of the questions, and then myself, and then Dr. Cosgrove and Deborah can add, but if I've missed anything. The first one was Councillor Devaney in relation to any other practices at risk. I suppose there would be practices who are at various stages in relation to their sustainability. The crisis response team and staff in the local offices are working with those practices to help alleviate any issues that they may have in order to get them over the difficulties that they find themselves in at present. So you have 319 practices. So across those 319 practices in Northern Ireland, there are other practices who are at risk. However, we are working with them, staff in the local offices and staff in the crisis response team, working with the GP federations, are working with those practices to try and help alleviate the problems that the practices unfortunately find themselves in at present. So we are aware of other practices and we are working with them. And the Councillor Guy asked questions then in relation to, has this happened before? And yes, it has happened before, where other contractors have handed back their contract. We've went out, we've advertised, and we have secured new contractors for those patients. So this is nothing new, and I've highlighted some of the history of it across the Western area in terms of Western Rural Healthcare, of Brookborough and Tempo, of Maple, of Culca. Also, I look after the Southern area as well, and there are a number of practices who handed back their contract in the Southern area, who we have secured a new contractor before. So there are situations of this happening in the past, and we have been in the situation of securing a new contractor. In terms of dangling any carrots, I suppose, should a new contractor be offered the contract, yes, we will work with them to identify any additional support that they may need to try and take in order to take on this contract. So we work with the new contractor, and if they identify ways in which we can be of assistance, and we do work with them. We have just released the Attract, Recruit, Retain scheme, which is a financial incentive for GP locums to take on either a salaried or a partnership practice, salaried or partnership role in a practice. So there is that incentive. We identify, we have an improvement grant scheme which we make available for practices to help develop their premises. And obviously there is the city side development being taken forward. Now I know that's a few years away, but that will be a great benefit to a number of practices across the city. But we work with practices. Should they have any premises issue, we're more than happy to work with them to secure the necessary finance to enable them to improve the premises for the benefit ultimately of patients. Councillor Doyle then referred to guarantees. What I can say is I can't give 100% guarantee we will have 2 new contractors for those practices. We are making every effort to ensure that we will. What I can give you 100% guarantee is that all patients will have access to GMS services. I can't, at this point in time, I can't tell you what that will be 100% for both Bridge Street and for Shantallow. It could be a new contractor, it could be the trust, or in the worst case scenario, the patients may have to be dispersed to another contractor. But all patients will continue to have access to GMS services. We are confident that we will secure 2 new contractors for this, but I can't give you 100% guarantee in relation to that. In terms of the trust stepping in, the trust have been very supportive of general practice, and they stepped in very much at the last minute in relation to the Dromore and Trullick contract at the end of last June. So at very short notice, the trust did step in. So they have now that experience of working with general practice and working with ourselves in relation to that. Should we get to that situation, but we're working to ensure that we don't get to that situation. And then Councillor Farrell, in terms of GP practices, we do those visits on a 3-year cycle. However, yes, there are things that happen, but they can happen out. We could visit a practice last week, in the last month, but things could happen in that practice completely outside of the practice's control, but puts them into difficulty. So, you know, yes, maybe more regular visits would be, well, we're in regular contact with our practices. Deborah and Hilary and the local and other staff in the local office are in regular contact, daily contact with our practices, and obviously as well with Dr. Cosgrove and Dr. Ciarán McLaughlin. The medical advisors in the Western area are in regular contact with all of our practices. So if an issue does arise, we are made aware of it, and we try to work with those practices to ensure that we are in a position to address those difficulties that they find themselves in. Sorry, Kevin, if there's anything else that you would like to add.
Oh, well, just maybe take Councillor Devaney's point first about the other surgeries at risk, and you probably appreciate that this isn't just a Northern Ireland problem. It's UK-wide that there's a shortage and difficulty in delivering primary care services, although it's particularly bad in Northern Ireland over the past 12 months or so. Then Councillor Guy was talking about the upgrading and renovation at his own practice up in Bridge Street, as compared to the state of the building down in Shantallow. So there are 2 different types of contractors actually, because both Bridge Street practices are privately owned premises, you know, so that they can upgrade them, you know, when they decide. The Shantallow is actually a trust-owned health centre. And obviously in the pipeline is a new health and care centre down at Fort George, which would probably service a lot of the practices on the city side, which will be a purpose-built building, which will be a lot more attractive, you know, for younger GPs to work within at no commitment to the ownership of the building, and will also accommodate a lot more multidisciplinary support staff as well. So it should be an excellent centre for the whole area on the city side once it gets up and running. But obviously that's a couple of years down the line still. Just back to Councillor Doyle then, just to clarify that it's the department that makes decisions about increasing the number of doctors trained and increased funding for different parts of the health centre. The trust is actually just the arm of the health service that delivers hospital services and community nursing type of things, so that we wouldn't feed back each individual status in the practices that we go and visit to in particular, but we would just feed back the general concern that there's increasing risk here because the GP age profile is going to give problems, around the time that it has arisen here now. So the trust really, as I say, deliver normally secondary care services. So they took over Dromore and Trillick at very short notice because there was no contractor, and we thought dispersing that size of patient numbers to neighbouring practices would cause a real significant ripple effect. So the trust, they aren't used to delivering primary care services, so it's an expensive way of doing it. But if it came to the bit, they may well be involved in Chantallo. But as we said earlier on, that both Pat and myself would be fairly confident we will get contractors for these two practices that we're talking about today. But in the event of no contractor taking it on the patient's end or dispersed to a GP, so each patient will definitely have a GP, and they won't be dispersed as an entire group to one practice. They would be dispersed on a geographical basis to a number of practices to minimise the impact on the practices that are receiving them. But we hope that that doesn't arise in this situation. Then just back to that Councillor Farrell then as well about the more routine or the increasing frequency of practice visits. Even though we visited routinely every 3 years, some practices were visited more frequently than that if there was issues that we became aware of, whether it's in performance or whatever. And also, we always tell the practices that just to give us a shout if there's any issues arise, following our visit. And there's very open access between Deborah and Hilary, who are the leaders as a practice support managers in our office. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you everybody for your contributions, and thank you Pat and Deborah and Dr. Cosgrove for the information that you have shared with us. And I think any of the conversations I've had throughout the last number of months when this was first announced was that there would be a guarantee that no patient was left without a GP, and I think that was something that I have certainly clung on to when talking to patients to reassure them that they're not going to be left without access to a GP. We do recognise that there is crisis, there is huge demands and pressures on GP practices right across the city and district, but I think there's a lot of very vulnerable patients attached to these GP practices that we need to protect. I have one other question that probably hasn't quite been touched on, and it's in relation to staffing. Should a provider be identified, do the current staff that are there have to reapply for jobs, or do they naturally migrate? And forgive me if it has already been explained, but it's just to be clear on that point, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
That is an important point, Councillor. And yes, the staff, should a new contractor be secured, the staff automatically transfer across. They have that legal protection
on their current conditions of employment as well.
On their current terms and conditions.
Excellent. No, that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure that that was the case. So I really appreciate that. And that was, in terms of all the information that we have got today, I think we have a clear picture of how we're moving forward. I think that I like the fact that you are hopeful in terms of finding a provider that's going to come in and take over both the practices. While I'm a councillor for the Ballyarnett ward, I work within homeless services within the city, and a lot of our service users would use Bridge Street Medical, and they would be a particularly vulnerable group. So I would have concerns around that as well. But I really do thank you for coming along today and providing us with this information. And hopefully the next time we have cause to speak, there is positive news in terms of the allocation of contracts. So thank you very much for attending today, and thank you to members as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.